the call went out from Well Seasoned Productions for some reminiscences about socially distanced but staying connected, I thought, I've got a story about that. And it's an interesting story. It's a story of two guys. One of them, if you know Well Seasoned Productions, is Scott Smith, one of the founding members of the company, and the other one is me. My name is Reid Spencer. Now, in order to get this story, we have to go back in time. Scott and I met first doing productions at a community theater group called Kitchener-Waterloo Musical Productions, a company that had the good sense and the resources to hire the late and great Alan Lund as their director and choreographer. And even back in those days, in our teens, it was obvious that this was what Scott was supposed to do. He had a lovely tenor voice. He was a good actor and a wonderful dancer. And it was his life. And so, of course, I hated him. Come on, folks, if there was a young male part, Scott got it. He had the stuff. And I didn't. And very shortly thereafter, he started on a professional career, while I floundered about trying to figure out how to do that. So there's the first degree of separation. He went off to do what we both wanted to. Didn't help my feelings for him. I thought about it for a long time and decided what I'd always done was sing, and so I started my own studies as a classical vocalist. Now from there we have to fast forward a number of years. The year then was 1981. I was turning 30 that year. It was my first year as a performer in Canadian Actors Equity, and my first season both as a chorister with the Canadian Opera Company and my first season at the Stratford Festival. I got hired because I could sing the low notes in a production of Gilbert and Sullivan's HMS Pinafore. First day, walking into the upstairs room at the Avon Theatre, who should I walk into? Almost literally, but Scott Smith. There he was, my teenage nemesis. Who would have thought, right? But over the course of that season, I came to realize some things. First of all, Scott wasn't my nemesis. I was. Scott knew how to get there. I hadn't a clue. And here we were working together again. And over the course of that season, I discovered a couple of things. First of all, he was still very talented, but he was a really nice guy. And I liked him. So then we separated again. The season ended. We went off our separate ways. The next season, we were back at the festival in Brian MacDonald's now sort of legendary production of The Mikado. And after that season ended, we both went into a rather ill-fated Pirates of Penzance at the Royal Alexandra Theatre in Toronto. Now that is a story in and of itself, but what you need to know is we had an incredibly short rehearsal period and a really short time between the time that we knew we were doing it and when that started. And so I ended up staying with Scott and Leslie at their home in Toronto because I didn't live in the city. And after a long day of rehearsal, we'd get back to the house, and because choreography still wasn't something that was really a friend of mine, Scott would help me get the steps into my feet. That's a connection. And it was an amazingly generous thing to do. I don't think I've ever properly said thank you for that. So Scott, if you're watching, thank you, eh? Now, from that point, of course, there was separation again. Our careers went in wildly different directions. The opera singer on one hand and the song and dance man on the other. There was very little place where those careers overlapped. So now we have to fast forward a long time. During that time, I continued with my studies. I earned a doctorate in voice. I don't know how I did that. I started teaching. I taught at colleges and universities. Scotty carried on performing and tapped into a skill as a writer. And we go forward to, I think, 2018, when I became aware of a company called Well Seasoned Productions. And strangely, I knew a couple of the people who helped to get it started. Leslie Valentine and Scott Smith. And I found out that Leslie and Scott were doing a fundraiser, a cabaret, with the great David Warwick at the piano at a venue in Toronto. And I thought, well, what the heck, I'll go see their show. And so I did. And as I wrote to them later, what I watched up there were these two incredibly seasoned professional performers who took that audience in their hands and just held them there for the entire performance. And it was wonderful. And it led me to thinking, after all those years in the classroom, I wonder if I can still do that. Which led to a conversation with the aforementioned David Warwick, and a few months later I was in the same venue doing a one-man show of songs from musical theater. And lo and behold, Scott and Leslie showed up to support me. And out of that came an offer a few months after that to do a production with Well Seasoned. So after almost 50 years of connection and separation, Scott and I were back on stage together. We had a blast. And it was as though the intervening years really hadn't been there. Yes, Scott still helped me get my feet right in the choreography that Leslie set for us. Now here's the thing. There have been a lot of separations. These two careers were wildly different. There was no way that we would stay connected that way. And yet, the connection was still there because that's what this business does. And it's not just the connection between two guys. It's the connection between us, but also between us and all of those audiences down through the years. And then, of course, COVID came. And social distancing became a thing for all of us. And it shut down the theaters and we couldn't work. I am hoping at some point before all of this is done that I'll get to share a stage with Scott again. But even if that doesn't happen, that connection is still going to be there. And it will be there until both of us are gone and neither of us can remember. Because that's what this business does. And that, my friends, is worth celebrating.
This is my rebuttal to Reid Spencer. Hi, Reid. Listen, if it makes you feel any better, I'll let you in on a little secret. Now, we've known each other for a long time. And even back in my cocky days of the early 70s, 80s, 90s. All right, some things never change. Anyhow, I always thought that you had the most wonderful voice of anyone that I had ever heard. Honest. Second, you could read music and you could play the piano. I couldn't, still can't. And I always really, really wanted to. Something about these mitts that just lack any kind of fine motor skills. Anyhow, so there. Feel better? I hope so.